Anthony Richardson versus Daniel Jones. Who emerges as the Colts QB1 out of training camp? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of this evening. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of HorseshoeHuddle.com. My partner in crime, Jake Arthur, is our credentialed boots on the ground for the site. He was back at the facility today talking to new Colts players. I think it was Khalil Herbert.
And we zoomed it today. Yesterday was on site. Yeah.
Okay. So you didn't have the boots on the ground today. You were just, sandals or something at home.
Today was awesome because we didn't even know Ballantyne was happening. And then they're like, we're going to make Corey Ballantyne available. We're like, what? Who? Okay.
Yep. Jake was a true insider there, tweeting it out, I think, around the same time as Stephen Holder, and he was able to break the news to all of us that Corey Ballantyne was getting signed.
We all had a while to have that draft in our folder.
Yeah. So, boots on the ground, Jake Arthur, joining me, as always, tonight, and we are doing a Q&A episode for all of you guys. It's the middle of free agency. The Colts have made a plethora of signings at this point. They brought in a quarterback, big free agents on defense. So we're going to go through all the questions that you guys had today. First segment, we're going to talk all about the quarterback competition that you guys are eagerly asking about right now. We're going to talk about free agency and what's still to come here in free agency. And then also we're going to focus on the draft and get through some of your many, many questions there on the draft. But Jake, I don't want to waste too much time. We already had enough quips at the top of the show here. Let's dive into this quarterback competition. One of our first questions we got here, though, was what kind of camp split do we expect to see with the ones for Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones? They want to sell this as a true competition, Jake. So what do you think that camp split looks like, especially like early on in training camp?
Well, if it's anything like 2023, the last time we saw a true competition, Gardner Minshew versus Anthony, if I recall, how Shane did it was, let's say there were 5 training camp practices in a week. It would basically be, I can't remember if they alternated each day, but it feels like there was like 3 days, one guy getting all the ones, 2 the other, and then they did it that way off and on. So I don't think they do it within a practice. Like a guy gets an entire day. And I think they do it at least a couple days in a row. So I do imagine they're going to get a true 50-50 split. And then how it was with Anthony was what was it? The second preseason game, they declared him the starter or something.
Yep.
So they got through 2 or 3 weeks of training camp practice before they declared a winner. So it feels like that's what they'll probably do here. Again, Anthony's probably going to be the leader in the clubhouse. So I don't know if they're going to drag it out throughout the entirety of preseason and training camp, but it feels like it'll be pretty similar to 2023.
Yeah, I think, not to repeat too much of what you're saying here, but I do think it'll be similar to that. Maybe it's like a 55-45 type split. Like if there's an odd number of days, Richardson will technically get more days with the ones, but I do think for the most part, it will be around 50-50 split and they'll alternate days. And I'm sure each one of them will get a chance to run with the starters in a preseason game before they make their decision. And I think that's the way it's going to run out there.
Yeah.
Now, again, I think Richardson is who they want to win. I think he's going to get more opportunities than Daniel Jones, but they're going to want to sell this as a true open competition. So it'll be pretty close to 50-50, I think.
Yeah, I got to agree there. And it's when you're going through a camp battle, it really is. You got to wonder if anyone else is barely going to get any reps. Like Jason Bean or whoever QB3 is, they're hardly going to be able to evaluate them, I'm sure. But this next one here, again, keeping with the theme of the QB battle from Philip on Twitter, everyone seems in agreement that if both guys play their best, that Anthony would handily beat Jones for the QB job. So my question is, what percentage of AR is still a better option than Jones? Like, how poorly would Anthony have to actually do to lose his job to Jones?
Yeah, so obviously, I think what Philip is saying here especially is if Richardson becomes the quarterback the Colts drafted him to be, obviously he's going to win the job here. But I do really like the way this is phrased because at what point do you say Daniel Jones has won this competition? Because I'm of the
Mhm.
opinion that this competition is more so Richardson versus Richardson than it is Richardson versus Daniel Jones. Because
Yeah.
if both guys come into camp looking like legit starting quarterbacks, they're going to go with Anthony Richardson. There's not really anything Daniel Jones can do in this competition to win it over Richardson in terms of like Richardson not losing it for himself.
Mhm.
Like if Richardson could look like a low end starting quarterback and Daniel Jones could look like the second coming of Peyton Manning, they're still going to lean into Richardson because that's the guy that has the more potential for the future. So, yeah, I think I think at the bare minimum, you need to see Richardson be better than what he was last offseason and quite frankly for most of last season as well. And I think he's going to be the starting quarterback. To me, again, this competition is more Richardson versus Richardson than it is Richardson versus Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I think it would have to be glaringly obvious, like who's the better quarterback. Again, it's Anthony's to lose. It feels disingenuous to say it's a true scrap everything, start from the bottom 50-50 chance for either guy because you know who's the one with the higher ceiling. Like if Anthony is the one that is even only slightly less productive in camp, like you're probably still going to give him the nod because you know what the ceiling is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it would come down to like Shane hearing from the players and stuff that they think Daniel is probably the better way to go. And again, I think it'd have to be glaringly obvious on the field. Anthony would have to be slipping up in his preparation and stuff like that. So it very much feels like it's his to lose, not so much Jones's to gain, like you mentioned there.
Right.
So coming up next from Jan on Twitter, how do you think the quarterback competition will impact the locker room? And I love this question. It seems to be different situations with all that is riding on Anthony Richardson. So I think this kind of stems from kind of like the confusion and miscommunication in the locker room last year. Anthony was benched for a couple weeks, and it very much didn't feel like the locker room was on board with that. They didn't really necessarily outwardly question it and like push against it, but everyone very much was in Anthony's corner. You just got the sense from talking to a bunch of guys that maybe it's not the move they would have made. So I think just in general, guys want to win. And I think the guys in the locker room were very well aware of Anthony, preparing, but maybe not to the level a quarterback needed to. And so if he's not holding up his end of the bargain and it looks like Daniel Jones is better for the offense, then sure, I think they would go that way. But I think this locker room is still clearly behind Anthony, especially from the growth that he showed on the field and behind the scenes after his benching. I don't think it would fracture the locker room, but I am pretty sure I know which side the players are on.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the players want Richardson to be the guy. He's the younger player. He's the guy that the Colts invested a high draft pick in. And quite frankly, they've been with him the last 2 years. They haven't been with
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Jones. Like, unless, again, Jones comes in and becomes this superstar quarterback that he's never been in the NFL, these Colts players are going to want it to be Richardson. But the theme of this offseason for the Colts has been adding competition and not sticking to the status quo. I mean, you look at the Colts bringing back Schrader at kicker, that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of telling Matt Gay, like, hey, get your stuff together
From the
here.
top of the roster to the bottom.
Right,
Yep.
right. It's bringing in Corey Ballantyne, a guy who has experience with the Colts defensive backs coaches. It's kind of telling guys like Juju Brents, like, you got to be healthy if you want to make this team and stuff like that. And that's just those are just a couple of the many guys that they brought in for competition. Khalil Herbert competing with Tyler Goodson for his roster spot and other running backs on the team. So I think the theme of this offseason has been no one should be comfortable. And that's perfectly fine. That's a great thing you should be saying. So look, these are professionals. These are adult men in here. Obviously, they're going to want Anthony Richardson to be the guy. But if Daniel Jones gives them the better chance to be successful and to win, they're going to rally around that. I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
better communication right now to do it rather than pulling the rug halfway through the season like they did last year, kind of sloppily like they did. I think it's better right now to say going into camp like, hey, best guy wins, best guy will be our quarterback. I think players can understand that and accept that, especially better compared to last season.
Yeah, and I know Joe Flacco was on the heels of a comeback player of the year award the year before, but I do think it's probably easier to sell the locker room on Daniel Jones if he looks really good versus what it did with Flacco last year. Because Flacco gave you no future. He was 39 years old, I believe, taking the spot of a 22-year-old essentially. So At least with Daniel Jones, you're working with a guy that's like 28 and has some room ahead of him in the NFL. But yeah, coming up, guys, we're going to talk about free agency now. We're through the first wave. We're into the second wave now, and the Colts may not be done moving. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening pretty much every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. And the FanDuel app is super easy to use. And when I win, I get paid instantly. There is no waiting around for what I have won. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, Zach, I like this next question here because I kind of wrote about it today and I totally scrapped the idea of free agency for it because I'm no longer down with it. So at this point in free agency, who replaces EJ Speed at weak side linebacker?
Yeah, I don't think there's many options in free agency, at least in terms of like bringing in a guy who's no doubt going to start at that position. You could go get like an Isaiah Simmons, who the former safety / linebacker hybrid from New York, very athletic, but you would have him more in a competition with a Jalen Carlisle to maybe get snaps next season. He could work. I mean, CJ Mosley's out there, but at this point in his career, he's like 33 years old.
Mosley and Franklin seems odd.
Right. Yeah. So at this point, I don't really think there's like a bona fide starter out there to grab in free agency. Again, you can go get someone like a Simmons to compete for snaps, but I think more so if you're looking at anybody in free agency, it's more for like that competition rather than a legit starter. I think if you're going to find a starter, it's either going to be in a guy like Carlisle, who they just drafted, or in spending a draft pick in this upcoming draft, like a Jahad Campbell at 14, get him in here, and then we just roll from there.
Yeah, no, the answer is most definitely it's not free agency, it's the draft. And if it's anyone, it would be Jalen Carlisle in that instance. But no, I was looking at the options today and I did not like any matches for what the Colts probably need.
Yeah, I will say this, though. If the Bengals do extend Trey Hendrickson and extend all these other guys they're talking about right now, Jermaine Pratt might get cut, and then maybe a Jermaine Pratt. But again, I don't love that fit with Zaire Franklin either. So
another odd one. Yeah,
I could live with that one, but I would still probably rather go the draft route, especially again if we're talking like a Jahad Campbell.
Yeah, for sure. All right, this next one is from Brian on Blue Sky. Put out the bat signal on Blue Sky today as well, and actually got a lot of responses. So make sure you're following Zach and I on there. What kind of defensive scheme changes do you expect from Lou Anarumo now after adding Charvarius Ward?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can kind of just expect the things that we expected when he came here. Because again, we talked about this so much when they hired Lou Anarumo. He wants to be multiple. He wants to be diverse. He wants to mix in press man coverage and let his corners be physical. And he couldn't do that if he had the personnel that Gus Bradley had last season. So giving him a guy like Charvarius Ward and giving him a guy even like Cameron Bynum, he can be diverse. He can be multiple. He can disguise things pre-snap. And one more thing that we also need to talk about is Charvarius Ward said in his press conference he's going to travel with number 1 wide receivers. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to be in press man every single snap, but it gives you the opportunity to do something like that, especially in the red zone. Charvarius Ward is so good in the red zone against opponent number 1s. So just being able to take away the AJ Browns and the Nico Collins and like those type of players of the world, having a guy who can actually match up with those guys is massive for this team. So yeah, I think this allows Lou Anarumo to be the Lou Anarumo that you want him to be, because you're actually giving him weapons on defense. So, this could be a much longer answer, but to keep it quick for the sake of time here, I think we're going to see some great changes from Lou.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of luxury in being able to have a guy that shuts off half of the field. And I mean, that definitely is beneficial to pass rush and safety play and everything. So that alone, I think is going to be really beneficial for the Colts D. Next one from Echo Warrior on Twitter. Do you think the Colts pick up another offensive tackle that pushes Blake Freeland for a roster spot?
Yeah, there's not many veteran tackles out there left. Like they could go like the really veteran route. Like I think
A lot
like a
of
George
30
Fant.
plus year olds. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think a George Fant is still out there. That's an interesting guy who's been around for a little bit. But I mean, even some of the lower end guys that I've liked, like Storm Norton was out there. He got re-signed. Matt Pert was out there. He got re-signed. So it is kind of drying up a little bit. But I do think the Colts want to upgrade over that swing tackle spot, especially if Gonzalez is moving down to right guard. So I could certainly see them grabbing someone like a George Fant so they don't have to rely on Blake Freeland, because last year they were anticipating Blake Freeland being the swing tackle. They saw how he looked a couple days into camp, and then it became Gonzalez is our right tackle is of the
Yeah.
future. So I think ideally they do want to have a more reliable backup tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether that's in the draft or free agency, they're not done at tackle. I can assure you that one. This next one from Seth on Twitter. Do you think trading for Trey Hendrickson is a smart use of resources for where the team is at right now?
I could see an argument for it, just because, again, getting a player like Trey Hendrickson is so great. Like, that's a top tier pass rusher. But on the other end of it, like giving up a legit top 100 pick. Again, the Bengals apparently want a first round pick plus more. Giving up a first round pick for him is kind of insane at
He's
31
30
years
plus.
old.
Yeah, he's 30
Yeah.
plus.
Yeah, and the contract you'd have to give him, that's just a lot. But like, even if we go the realistic route and you're giving up, say, your third round pick for him, which is doable, and you're giving him that contract, are the Colts in the right position to be giving a 31-year-old pass rusher nearly $40 million per year? I don't know if they're really in that position yet. Again, take the big swings where you can. This team just needs talent. So if they did make this trade, I wouldn't cry or complain about it. But I don't really think this is the type of team that needs that all-in move for Hendrickson, because I don't think they're a Trey Hendrickson away from winning anything super serious right now. So I think it would be smarter to allocate those resources, the cap space, and allocate those draft picks to just building up this roster a little bit more than making that swing for Trey Hendrickson right now.
Yeah, rewinding just a week ago, I was way more on board with it, but there's been a lot of development over the last week in the way the Colts have spent some of the money they would have been able to have for Trey Hendrickson. And it just doesn't make as much sense now. They would have to clear up a bunch of cap space that they've already used. If the first round pick is unrealistic for someone of that age. And again, he's not the missing piece for the Colts to get to the Super Bowl. It was the situation was just a lot different even just a week ago. So at this point, I would say the ship is probably flown unless their asking price drops pretty drastically. All right, next one from Eric on Twitter. Best available offensive lineman, tight end, and linebacker left on the free agent market. If you don't want to be concerned into making it a huge priority in the draft. So again, offensive lineman, tight end, and linebacker. Those might be the three least sexy positions for me right now in free agency.
Yeah, I don't want to be pigeonholed into saying who the best available are right now, because it's like we're in wave like 3 right now of free agency. So it's a lot of minor deals, and we'll get a couple guys getting decent deals the rest of the way. But for the most part, it's lower end deals. I'll just throw out a couple names that I kind of like for there. Like, again, on the O-line, getting like a George Fant in here, I think would be a pretty interesting get as a swing tackle. If you want to go for a starting guard, Mekhi Becton is still out there, I believe, so you can get him to start at right guard.
Tevin Jenkins.
Tevin Jenkins. His market might be a little too much for me for what he is, but Becton, I think, would make a little bit more sense. And then linebacker, I just like taking the shot on Isaiah Simmons. I really do like taking that shot there. Tight end, probably the trade market. Michael Mayer, maybe seeing if the Eagles do cut Dallas Goedert. I don't think they will, but maybe waiting that one out there. I think Tyler Conklin is also still on the market, so maybe a Tyler Conklin. But tight end, I mean, look, they're going to be pigeonholed into drafting a tight end this year for sure. I hope they can find some capable guys out there as well, but they're going to be pigeonholed into drafting one pretty high there at tight end.
For sure. Honestly, I don't even love the idea of giving up a bunch of draft capital right now, but other than like Tyler Conklin, I would probably rather shoot for trading for Mark Andrews or Michael Mayer or Dallas Goedert at this point. You never know what the price is. If it's low enough, why not? And then this last one for this segment from Doovie on Twitter. Is there any change to Laiatu Latu and Kwity Paye's roles with Lou Anarumo?
Yeah, so with what we saw with Gus, those two are both basically living in wide 9 last year. So basically the like if you have tight ends on the end of the line, they're going to be outside of the tight ends. They're going to be outside of the furthest blocker on the offensive line. And that's the way that Gus Bradley liked to live in his defense. So what teams were doing is they were stacking the line with 12 and 13 personnel, and they were just running up the gut with the defensive end spread out way too wide. What we'll see more with Anarumo is more of those defensive ends coming in a little bit more, especially on early downs. You'll see a little bit tighter fronts from them, more 5-tech, more 6, even some 4-eye, like some of those type of things there, especially with Kwity Paye. But once we get to the pass rushing downs, we will see them getting out to the wide 9s, especially Laiatu Latu. He'll be living in wide 9 on pass rushing downs. And then we'll see some more sim blitzes and different things there. I think the biggest change we'll really see with these guys is just when you have a defensive secondary that's not only better, but also more diverse in making quarterbacks think, these pass rushers will actually have a chance to be productive in terms of the ball's not being out in 2.1 seconds. If the ball is out in 3 seconds, you actually have a chance to make an impact on the game and getting sacks in the backfield. So yeah, we'll see some minor changes with alignments. Like Kwity Paye will be more of like a true run stuffing defensive end. Like think of him being like a Sam Hubbard for the Colts this next season, and Latu being the Trey Hendrickson, hopefully the Trey Hendrickson, but at least in that similar role. But when it gets to passing downs, they'll both kick out to their wide 9s. They'll be attacking with speed and power, and hopefully they'll have more time to get to the quarterback this next year.
Absolutely. All right, guys. And you guys went nuts for the draft questions, so we're going to get to that in just a moment. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? As someone who experiences a life on Earth, I think that all the time. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track of where your money's going, and that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery, which I do not regret. That's where my dinner came from last night. But now I budget a little smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. All right, we're going to try and zoom through these as quick as we can, Zach, while giving nice, thoughtful answers as well. So this is from the Insider Program. Now that the free agency initial scramble is done, what are your thoughts for the draft? Offensive line and tight end in the first 2 rounds? Linebacker and defensive tackle? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think they're very pigeonholed right now into tight end in one of the first 2 rounds, probably round 1 if we're looking at a Tyler Warren being there, maybe trading up for a Tyler Warren, because when you're looking at this roster, the most pressing need is a legit playmaking tight end, is getting that Tyler Warren type player in here. So I think early on we are kind of seeing the Colts be pigeonholed into a tight end pretty early, but obviously they could continue add to the trenches. Obviously a linebacker would be great. I don't think they're like too stiff right now. It just really takes away the defensive back need. I think like we're not really going to hear much about the Malachi Starks or Nick Emenwari or any of these corners.
Even Will Johnson at this point either.
Yeah, Will Johnson. I don't think any of those make sense for the Colts in round 1, even though I don't know if Ballard was going to take like a non-playmaker / trench player that high, but I think it does take that off the board quite a bit. But I still think we'll see them make a big play for tight end, maybe linebacker, and then look, it's Ballard. He's going to invest a lot in the trenches for sure.
Which leads us to our next one from Bobby from Blue Sky. He was wondering basically how fixed is Ballard going to get on getting a defensive end if it's there for him. Shamar Stewart, for example, let's say that.
Yeah. No, that's always a great question, because I think Ballard views the most pressing things for a team to get early in drafts are trenches and offensive playmakers. I think those are his 2 biggest priorities. So we've seen him take obviously quarterback high and try to get wide receiver high like he did last year. But if it's not those, it's trenches. So I do think if like a Tyler Warren is off the board, I could totally see him going defensive line there. I do think Tyler Warren would be their guy if he's there at 14. I feel very comfortable saying that. Like if he's there at 14, they're running that card in. They might trade up for him even. I don't know. But I do think if he's gone, it really could be a pass rusher yet again, defensive tackle or defensive end.
All right. So Benny from Blue Sky, I'd love some second and third round linebackers in the draft to keep an eye on.
Oh gosh, I have not been the scout for
I can
linebackers.
take day two
Yeah,
linebackers for you.
I'll give this to you. I mean, Jeffrey Bossa, right? I've heard that name a couple times.
Buddy, he may not be till late third, fourth round with the way he was working out there. But
I like the UCLA guy, Schlesinger, or whatever his name is.
Carson
Yeah.
Schlesinger. Yep. So I was going to give you guys three. Carson Schlesinger, really good in pass defense. Smile Mondon from Georgia. And then you could probably throw Demetrius Knight in there. If you want a thumper with some range, he's probably more of a third round guy. So his stock is all over the place. But that's three guys that I would like there. Maybe Shamar James from Florida. He's probably going to be a fourth rounder as well. Probably a day three guy, but we'll see. And then Kyle from Blue Sky. Told you guys Blue Sky went crazy today. It feels like the draft vibes are that if Warren is available at 14, the Colts will pick him. But with the help at defensive back brought in through free agency, we're talking about, Bynum and Ward, obviously. Would it be best player available, or should they trade up for Warren?
Look, I think the Colts would be privy to maybe trading up for Warren at this point. And I'll be quick with this answer here, but just me doing my Brian Windhorst impression, with the fingers up saying, I'm just saying, but like,
what is going on?
Yeah, like I'm just saying. But the thing is here, this offseason has been about Chris Ballard getting his guy, right? It's about him closing the deal, getting across the finish line and getting his guy no matter what. Like with Charvarius Ward, how they had to come in with a late offer to beat out the New Orleans Saints to get him. So it's been about him closing the deal. And we know last year how hard he tried to get up there to get Bowers and Neighbors. Those were the two guys he was really trying to get. So if this offseason is all about him closing the deal and say they have Warren as their top guy, I could totally see him maybe offering more than what he did last year to go up and get a Tyler Warren, and really complete the thing that he feels like this offense needs. So I think as of right now, I'm saying I would lean towards them trading up for Tyler Warren on draft day to get that done. Maybe it's too obvious, but I think that's their guy as of right now.
Yeah, I feel like there are fewer tight end needy teams now before and around the Colts that either would have sniped them or traded up ahead of them. So I think their chances are better, but you can't leave it to chance after what happened to you last year, basically.
Right.
And then this next one from Andrew on Twitter, I'll basically kind of reword it now. But who would have to be gone for the Colts to trade back? So like, now that we've got some free agency stuff, we talked about Will Johnson, Malachi Starks, obviously Tyler Warren is in there, but who would have to be off the board basically for them to be comfortable trading back?
Yeah, I think Tyler Warren and Jahad Campbell, they would take both of those guys.
That's the 14. Two examples this question actually used.
Yeah, so I think Warren, they would certainly take at 14. Jahad Campbell, I think if Warren is gone, they would take him at 14. There's a lot of teams in that range that really like Campbell, so he might be gone by 14 as well. But I think those are the two guys that they would run the card in for. I don't get a good vibe on them with Loveland. I'm just not sure what they would do there, but he's kind of hit or miss for me if they would take him at 14. But after that, I do think a trade back kind of comes into play there. I don't think there's an offensive lineman that's really going to intrigue them. I make all the jokes about Shamar Stewart, but I don't know if they would actually take him that high. I think they would rather probably trade back and recoup some picks at that point. So I really do think that they're kind of playing for like a Tyler Warren or Jahad Campbell, unless they have someone in a similar situation as Latu last year that they didn't think was going to fall to 14, and then he happened to fall to 14, so they ran that card in. So we'll see, but I think Warren and Campbell are the two guys that they're really in on right now.
Yeah, let's start kind of changing up the flavor here because we're talking about a lot of the same guys in range at this point. This one's from our guy Felipe on Twitter. What do you guys think of Malachi Moore as a day 3 pick? But he says, I don't love him as a safety, but I do think he'd be good development behind Kenny for the future in the nickel. I kind of like that idea.
Yeah, I like Malachi Moore. I talked to him at the combine. Very smart kind of reserved guy, and which is funny that he's a reserved guy because on film he's a very physical and violent type player. I really like the way that he plays the game, and again, to me, he's a chess piece type player. He's a guy who can play some safety, play some nickel, and if you're adding that guy as your third safety and your backup nickel, you fill two roles right there with one player. I think that just makes your team better, and it adds versatility and diversity to your defense. So yeah, Malachi Moore is a guy that I've really had circled as like a day 3, late day 2 type guy for the Colts, and I think he'd be a really fantastic fit for this team.
Yeah, how the roster lines up right now, I think they still definitely need a backup nickel, and they need more depth at safety. So a guy like that kind of checks multiple boxes, I think that would be perfect. Let's see. If you could pick any defensive tackle in this draft to replace Buckner and Stewart, who would it be and why? I'm going to frame it from the way of basically they're going to compete to be your third, fourth defensive tackle, and then within a year or so, they can be the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're looking in like round 1, like a player like a Walter Nolan or
Thank you.
Or like a Kenneth Grant from Michigan, those guys have very, very high potential. So maybe if Campbell and Warren are both off the board and you just don't love Loveland, then you could go with one of those two guys and say, look, we're just going to build this nasty interior defensive line. And then once we lose a Grover or a Buckner, one of those guys can start for us. So you can go with that early. If you want to go a little bit later, maybe like a Darius Alexander on like day 2. I know he's a little bit older, but very athletic, smooth pass rusher. He can be your guy who fills in for Grover Stewart on pass rushing downs, and then maybe over time he can be your next Buckner. I'm not saying he's going to be as good as DeForest Buckner, but I think that could be an intriguing option to look at there on day 2.
Yeah, no, Nolan's definitely my guy. I would throw, maybe Deion Walker in there as well on day 2 if you want a huge guy. So apparently he had a back injury he was playing through all of last year that kind of affected his tape a bit. But he's fully healthy now. He just performed at his pro day. So I think he gets a little more interesting now, having kind of considered that. Let's see. This next one I was pretty interested in. With the addition of Daniel Jones, is quarterback still a possibility anywhere on the draft board for the Colts?
I could see like around 6 or 7, maybe, that they would take a quarterback like they did with Ellinger a couple years ago, but I don't think it's a priority for them. In this draft, I could certainly see like an undrafted free agent come in and compete with Jason Bean to be QB3/practice squad quarterback, but I don't really see them investing a pretty high pick in a quarterback by any means. I mean, maybe if they have a guy with a round 1 grade that's there in round 2, they pull the trigger at that point. But aside from that, I don't think they're going to muddy this quarterback competition by adding a legit draft pick to it. But day 3, anything's on the table. Like they could fall in love with Kyle McCord from Syracuse and say, round 6, come in here, compete and see if you can earn a roster spot. I could certainly see that, but I don't think it's going to be like a serious pick spend at quarterback.
Right. I think if they would have got like a Nick Mullins or like a Kyle Allen or something instead of Daniel Jones, you're maybe looking at anywhere from round 3 to 5. But yeah,
right.
I think it was his name, like Cook from Iowa or something might be a nice little option late in the draft.
Don't ever say an Iowa quarterback. No, Jake. It's Cook from Missouri.
Is it Missouri?
Missouri. There's no quarterback from Iowa that ever will get drafted again. If you see how their offense plays.
It's a black and gold team from the Midwest. My bad.
Oh, man.
So we're going a little long, but this last one here. So this is from Kyle on Blue Sky. Is Chris Ballard scheduled for another press conference before the draft? We, the fans, have very little info directly from the GM this year, basically just that tight end and interior O-line are deep positions in this year's draft. Yes, every kind of front office general that speaks at the combine, they all have to give a pre-draft press conference as well. So Chris's is usually within a week and a half before the draft. So yes, we will hear from Chris one more time.
Awesome. So that's our long-winded Q&A episode, guys. You guys keep them coming. We love getting all the questions from you guys, and we'll make sure to keep fitting. I mean, you guys heard how we were going in this episode. We will try to fit in as many as possible. So shout out to all you guys on Blue Sky, YouTube, Twitter, and with the Insider Program, and with Facebook for sending in all your questions. Please continue to do so in the future. We're going to have tons of these throughout draft season and the rest of off season. And we want to thank you guys for making Locked On Colts your first listen today. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop, follow the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here next week. Unless they sign someone, but next week, probably.